556 is brought to you by the first annual Intergalactic Imagination Connoisseurs Film Festival. You've made your movie, right? You're going to submit it, aren't you? Everyone's waiting with bated breath. They're waiting for your movie. Imagine how many people you'll disappoint if you don't submit one. I mean, I can't even imagine ramifications if you don't. You got to do it. Please. Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your what else do I say? Viceroy of Verisimilitude, Chancellor of Cheerfulness, Archbishop of Banterbury. Yeah, you know it all. I've said it so many times. Sommelier of Cinema. Yeah, do you need to hear it again? But you know what you do need to hear? The existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett. And yes, I am Rob-casting at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. And it is Saturday. And this is Robservations episode number 556. Glad to have you here. Also glad, I hope you've checked out our new show. Dieter Bastian and I have teamed up, bringing two halves of the world together for Let's Get Physical Media. Fun show, first episode. The second episode is in the can, and it's in post. And these episodes will drop on Tuesdays. It just took me a while to get this one up and running because there was a lot to it, and I had to figure out graphics and things like that. You know, it's an ongoing process. It's evolution. It's evolution. That's what happens. You evolve and you try and make things better. But I'm really liking the show, and I want to tell everyone thank you for the kind feedback. We'll see where it goes. I mean, it was kind of neat not to do a live show, to be honest, and kind of play around with it a bit. It'll get more refined as we go. But if you like physical media, as Dieter and I do, if nothing else, hopefully our enthusiasm is infectious. And remember, as we point out in episode 2, if you do get a new Xbox or a new PlayStation 5, you can get a disc player in them, and you can start collecting just like us. I know I thought you were out, but we're going to pull you back in. We're going to evangelize the power of physical media, and we hope that you come along for the ride. So thank you for that. So I got to say, there was an article I read in the Hollywood Reporter that I've been thinking about a lot. And I've been doing some research, and basically, it comes down to, really, again, it's all about storytelling to me. Now, the thing is, most people lead lives of quiet desperation. Sometimes you can make a story like Death of a Salesman, tell that tale, put on that play, and it can be great. But let's face it, for the most part, most people lead, pretty mundane, ordinary lives, and sometimes you can find stories in the mundane or in the everyday. But stories usually are about the non-mundane things happen. Alfred Hitchcock said that drama is life with all the dull bits cut out. And let's face it, we sleep for 8 hours a day. Now, it doesn't matter who or what you are. If you're an aspiring presidential candidate, if you're a career criminal, if you're a superhero, whoever you are, you still need to sleep for 8 hours a day. And if you're going to tell a story about someone's life, you're going to skip over the time they're asleep. You might show somebody get up in the morning, or show somebody go to bed, or somebody making love. But for the most part, you're not going to spend a whole lot of time telling the tale of them sleeping, even though we all spend a third of our lives basically doing those things. Stories, by their very definition, have to be about extraordinary moments in people's lives. I mean, we can find the joy in the everyday, but really, stories are about things that aren't mundane, things that aren't everyday, things that are unusual. And by definition, well, I'd rather watch a story about, say, I don't know, Gilgamesh or the Avengers than what my mom did at the grocery store this afternoon. Not that my mom going to the grocery store isn't an event in itself. It's just that, is there anything inherent in that act? I mean, maybe that she's 81 and she had leg surgery, and the fact that she's still up and around and she can still go to the grocery store could be construed as some kind of a story point. But for the most part, I would much rather watch a story about a group of superheroes traveling back in time to get Infinity Stones from alternate universes to save the future, or something like that. But anyway, so there was an article in the Hollywood Reporter that I read, and I've been thinking about it for a long time. Well, the last week, not even last week, because it's only been 3 days since it was published. But I can't stop thinking about this article, and I've been thinking about it a lot. And I'm going to share it with you today. And this article, Hollywood's urgent responsibility to tell more authentic stories. Now, this was written by a TV producer, Angela Harvey. She's worked on things like Teen Wolf. And I would like to read it to you. This was published on the 11th of November. The question for writers shouldn't be rooted in whether or not one can write a story. It's whether or not they should. Nice evocation of Jurassic Park. You know what working from home makes me miss? Water coolers. If Hollywood still gathered in offices and writers' rooms, one of the hottest topics around those coolers today would be authentic storytelling on screen. Now, I have to jump right in and say authentic storytelling. I'm thinking to myself, what does that mean exactly? Some of my favorite stories was Apocalypse Now, an authentic evocation of what it was like to be in Vietnam. Is Star Wars authentic as far as what it means to be in a galaxy far, far away and a long time ago? Is any of the MCU or DC superhero movies, are those authentic in terms of what she's saying? I don't know. In September, the announcement that Ron Howard was attached to direct an adaptation of Chinese pianist Lang Lang's memoir, scripted by Michelle and Kieran Mulroney, drove director Lulu Wang to Twitter to express her dismay at Hollywood, telling yet another distinctly Chinese story while excluding Chinese voices from the key creative team. More directly and controversially, novelist and former congressional candidate Sarah Rao recently tweeted, "White people need to stop writing black and brown characters," with The Wire creator David Simon replying in part, "How about humans research and write other humans, and the results are judged?" Now, of course, David Simon, in creating The Wire, who had covered much of what was going on in Baltimore, was covering, say, when you're dealing with the police in Baltimore, which is a beat that he had covered for years, there were people of all shapes, sizes, and colors and creeds in that police department, in local politics. And would David Simon not write about the people that he covered for years? Simply because perhaps he couldn't get the authentic experience of someone's color, or I don't know. David Simon was writing about cops. But anyway. Orphan Black scribe Aubrey Neeland responded, "It's plainly wrong to claim that in a wildly inequitable system, all that matters is the quality of the product." Queen of the South writer Jorge Reyes says, "You can't say on one hand that you advocate for BIPOC inclusion, then bang on for the right to write BIPOC stories as if the opportunities to do such stories are infinite." This passionate, multifaceted, disjointed conversation shows how far we have to go in figuring out what exactly authentic storytelling means. The social unrest and political upheaval in our country show just how imperative it is that we figure it out. As a co-chair of the Think Tank for Inclusion and Equity, TTIE, and as a black woman, I'm glad these conversations are happening. It shows Hollywood is finally hearing underrepresented voices, even if it's still not quite listening to us. What is authentic storytelling, and how is it achieved? Who gets to tell what stories and why? Isn't all writing about the expression of shared humanity and therefore open to all? Yes, but also no. Much of why people think and behave the way they do is rooted in race, identity, and culture, even when, perhaps especially when, that race is white. The societal acceptance of whiteness as neutrality is one of the biggest roadblocks to authentic representation. Hollywood, too, sees all white spaces, neighborhoods, workplaces, social circles as normal. Anything outside of that experience gets relegated to politics or a very special episode. But this approach erases giant swaths of the human experience. Culture is absorbed at home, beginning in infancy. We become not who we are by repetition and ritual, conscious. We become who we are by repetition and ritual, conscious and unconscious. We learn about ourselves and the world around us through facial expressions, shared meals, familiar smells. You can't read or research your way into another person's identity, particularly when you've always lived in a society that's exclusionary and even hostile toward that identity. Intellectual ascension to other cultures is, of course, possible, but the heart and emotion of identity is individually unique. More than that, ingrained identity helps define what feels right or rings true to writers, readers, and ultimately viewers. In America, particularly in Hollywood and in the news, we have under and misrepresented most people for the better part of a century to disastrous consequences. As global consumption of television and film continues to rise, we're exporting these misrepresentations with all of our social biases and prejudices intact. Therefore, the question of authentic storytelling can't be rooted in whether or not a writer can write a story. The question must be whether or not they should. Over 70 million people in this country voted for a candidate who espoused open racism, violence, and oppression in the 2020 presidential election. They didn't do that in a vacuum. They have ideas about who BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, and disabled people are, despite personally knowing very few from marginalized communities. These ideas come, at least in part, from the media they consume. For the past several years, studios and networks have hired underrepresented writers as consultants and lower-level writers, or for authenticity or culture, passes on existing projects. But you can't put sugar into a cake after it's already baked. The culture pass is an attempt to pour glaze over that cake, baked without the necessary ingredients. It may become edible, it will never be delicious. The stories we tell should be a celebration of our differences and the specific things that make each of us who we are. The best way to make that happen is to empower underrepresented creatives to control their own stories. Now, I have to say, as far as this goes, Miss Harvey, I agree with her for the most part. And I think the whole purpose of this particular show, and the reason why I'm on YouTube in the first place, really, is because, what do I say? Every person has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. Now, the problem when it comes to Hollywood and entertainment is now there is a dollar value associated with the making of these stories that are going to be told. And by definition, they have to appeal to the widest common denominator, which means rather than look for the differences that make us different in all of us, we have to look for the commonality in the stories that we're telling to make the stories hopefully universally accepted. Now, I understand that is a conundrum because you want to see underrepresented people have a voice and tell their stories. But the thing is, are those stories worth telling? Is, hell, anyone's story worth telling? Is my story worth telling? Is your story worth telling? I mean, who knows? I agree with the writer who says, yes, we should be telling more diverse stories. We should hear more diverse voices, because I believe that stories with the kind of specificity that she's talking about become the most authentic. But the stories themselves, even if they're coming out of the most authentic representation of underrepresented groups, does that mean the story that's being told is going to appeal to the widest common denominator? And also, does that mean somebody should put, in the case of certain things, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars behind those stories? Because remember, Hollywood is first and foremost a business. It is a business that is designed to sell a product to the widest group of people possible. So you have to ask yourself, what stories are worth telling? Now, what I find really interesting is that in my mind, over the last, say, 20 years, I thought that we had been going in that direction, that we had been seeing more interesting stories told by more marginalized voices. And I looked. So let's take just a quick gander at the Academy Award winners and the nominees of the last, say, a little over a decade. Let's go all the way back to 2008. Slumdog Millionaire, while directed by Danny Boyle, was a story that was set in India with a predominantly East Indian cast. It won the Academy Award for Best Picture. And then, of course, we had that same year, Milk, the story of Harvey Milk, was made. A very famous person in the LGBTQ community who was assassinated, well, murdered, I guess, say assassinated, in San Francisco. Now, those were 2 films out of 5 that were nominated that year. That you had representation that was pretty interesting. Of the 5, there were only 5 films nominated. 2 of them, we saw a different culture, and the other was dealing with LGBTQ issues. That was 2008. In 2009, you had things, Precious, based on the novel Push by Sapphire, came out. And then in 2010, The King's Speech that won dealt with somebody, although he was royalty, he had a speech impediment. In 2010, not so much. But 2011, you had The Help. You had, The Help. There you go. Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. In 2012, we had Beasts of the Southern Wild in 2012. You had Django Unchained. You had Life of Pi. Well, and you also had Lincoln. 12 Years a Slave, 2013. Dallas Buyers Club, 2013. Philomena, 2013. It goes on. 2014, Selma, The Theory of Everything. In 2015, you had The Room, and in 2016, Moonlight, Fences, Hacksaw Ridge. 2017, Get Out, The Shape of Water, Call Me by Your Name. 2018, Black Klansman, Bohemian Rhapsody, a movie about a gay man directed by a gay man. Green Book, although a lot of people don't like that. Black Panther, Roma, The Favorite. 2019, Parasite won Best Picture. That's pretty good. I mean, if you think about how many people are making Best Picture winners and who are nominated, it went from 5 nominees up to 10 or less. But if you look at the amount of representation, could there be more? Sure. But if you look at the ethnic makeup of the United States of America, not bad. Not bad. And the fact that Parasite won Best Picture last year, and that we had Black Panther and Black Klansman and Bohemian Rhapsody, 3 films, and actually Roma, if you want to go that far too, 4 films that dealt with culture and representation, the likes of which we never had in the Academy Awards before. It's getting better. Representation is getting better. The people that are making films are becoming more and more diverse every day. And the voices that are being heard from across the board, there's more than ever before. Now, can there be better people? Or more, not better people, but more? Sure, we can always have more voices, but you also have to think about the actual makeup of the people from our society that go into Hollywood. Is Hollywood really preventing people from doing things? Look, the answer to that is yes. Hollywood is an equal opportunity disappointing business. For every single wildly successful person that you see in Hollywood, they have 10 disappointments behind them of projects they spent a lot of time, sometimes decades, trying to make, and they didn't get to make them. Hollywood as a business sucks for everyone. Aside from maybe those at any one point, they live in a rarefied air where they can get all their projects made. One of those people is Shonda Rhimes, a very successful black female producer who's one of the most vibrant creative entities in both television and streaming today, who's doing an incredibly diverse amount of projects. Now she's over at Netflix. She's self-made. I don't know much about her career other than how successful she's been. But, you know, we have opportunities for a lot of people, more than ever before. Now, can there be more? Sure. But the point is that we were on a course where things are changing. They're always evolving, and they're always getting better. That's why I find all of these, I don't know what it is. In the last couple of years, there's been this idea that we all live in this weirdly oppressive civilization. Hollywood is weirdly oppressive to everybody. Anybody who comes in here is going to be oppressed. I promise you. It sucks for everyone. Everyone, it is an equal opportunity suck fest to work in Hollywood. And the people that stay here, like I'm one of them, we lifers, there's something about it that keeps us coming back. Now, I agree. I want the most authentic. I am the viceroy of verisimilitude. I want the most authentic stories told. But you know what else I want? I want stories that I want to see. Now, I grew up watching, I'll watch anything. I've seen if you reached into my brain, I don't know many people that have seen as varied and as many different kinds of films as I have in my life. Sure, there are film critics that have probably seen more, but even in my younger days when I was going to the Seattle International Film Festival beginning when I was 12, I would watch any movie from any country in any language about anything. Sometimes I loved them, sometimes I didn't. But I have a pretty diverse background in terms of what I've seen in my life. And I'll tell you this, the one thing that I've learned is you can sometimes find movies that you think that are going to be the most boring, uninteresting things to you, and you watch them and you're blown away. That's why I think the diversity of thought and the diversity of the kinds of stories we tell are important. However, there are certain stories that I just really am not that interested in seeing on the screen unless there's a really innovative way to tell them. And also, not everyone's stories are that interesting. The real question and the real problem that I think that Hollywood has is Hollywood is making their stories inauthentic in order to have more authenticity and to be more inclusive. The stories themselves are being compromised. And that, my friends, I think is the real problem in Hollywood. If you want to tell a story about the sexual awakening of a black man in a movie like Moonlight, I think you really need somebody who understands that culture of where that man came from. They're going to be able to bring an insight to that story that say, a white guy is not going to be able to bring. Lulu Wang was correct when she talks about the new Ron Howard movie, that somebody needs to have an authentic voice or an understanding of what that culture was like that he came out of. But on the other hand, there's also a mythic quality. It doesn't matter what culture somebody's from. There is a mythic quality to anybody, any underdog. Doesn't matter where they're from or what they did. Like, would the world be better off if Bernardo Bertolucci didn't make The Last Emperor? Or would The Last Emperor be a better film if, say, a Chinese national made it? I don't know. Maybe it took somebody from outside of China to make the story of Pu Yi. Could be, because the story and his greatness, would it have been recognized in that culture? Who's to say? I think what's scary, though, is this idea that we now want to tell people or say who can and who can't tell stories, who's more qualified to tell a story based on what? That you were part of the culture, that you grew up as part of that culture, you belong to that culture, so you're better equipped to tell the story. Well, what if you're less knowledgeable about how to bring a mythic story to the screen? You know, there's components to everything. Now, there's another article I wanted to share with you as I move on. Hollywood's new era of McCarthyism. Yes, this was in the National Review. Like I said, I look for stories and things everywhere. This was published on July 22nd by John Loftus. This time, anyone who deviates in his politics, skepticism, or principles from Hollywood's progressive culture is suspect. In 2017, Stephen Galloway described the possibility of a new era of McCarthyism in Hollywood. Writing in The Hollywood Reporter, where he then served as executive editor, Galloway compared the treatment of conservatives in the film industry to the Hollywood 10. The 10 blacklisted professionals, mostly screenwriters, who served prison time and suffered professional and personal alienation for refusing to name names before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Back then, it was fear of communism. Now, it's fear of an amorphous enemy that's all the more potent to some for being unseen. Call it the fear of fear itself, Galloway continues. In an astonishing reversal of Hollywood history, just as liberals here once considered themselves an endangered species, so do conservatives today. Galloway, belonging to Hollywood's upper echelon, delicately phrased his argument back in 2017, so as not to estrange his colleagues. In keeping with progressive politics, he made sure to sprinkle in just the right amount of crumbs by mentioning the possibilities of Muslims being targeted in Hollywood for their religious views and the elimination of DACA. Two wrong predictions, as it turns out, but Galloway correctly predicted that McCarthyism would return. Indeed, the astonishing reversal of Hollywood history is on full display in 2020. The new era of McCarthyism does not target Muslims, illegal immigrants, or the nebulous other, or the abstracted away fear of fear itself, nor does it target Antifa sympathizers and CEOs who gladly conduct business with arguably the worst violator of human rights on the planet, the Chinese Communist Party. The other, in this case, is the working professional who deviates in his politics, skepticism, or principles from Hollywood's progressive culture. This culture, unsurprisingly, aligns with radical woke ideology, as championed by an organization such as Black Lives Matter. From the outside, this shouldn't surprise anyone, especially conservatives. Inside the industry, though, the blind hostility and dogmatism stupefy executives, producers, and other creatives whose careers had previously seemed secure. On July 11th, the Daily Mail published a piece describing this very phenomenon, citing anonymous observations and anecdotes from industry insiders. One studio executive said, "We're only hiring people of color, women, or LGBT to write, star, produce, operate the cameras, work in craft services. If you are white, you can't speak out because you will be instantly branded racist or condemned for white privilege. The pendulum has swung so far, everyone is paralyzed with fear by the idea anything you say can be misinterpreted and your career ended instantly," the piece continued. "There are a lot of hushed conversations going on, but publicly everyone is desperate to be seen to be promoting diversity and too terrified to speak out. It's imploding, a total meltdown." Another insider who was nominated for an Academy Award said, everyone wants to be able to check all the boxes for each new hire. BIPOC has become the trendy acronym, Black, Indigenous, Person of Color. Directors normally have a say about who is in their project. Not anymore. It's all about BIPOC hiring. And it's coming directly from the heads of the studios who know their jobs are on the line. White, middle-aged men are collateral damage. Meanwhile, distinguished filmmakers preach hiring practices that discriminate, but in the right way. Selma director Ava DuVernay wrote on Twitter, everyone has a right to their opinion, and we, black producers with hiring power, have the right not to hire those who diminish us. She goes on to say, so the white man in this thread, if you don't get that job you were up for, kindly remember, bias can go both ways. This is 2020 speaking. Jordan Peele, the Oscar-winning director and screenwriter, articulated the sentiment as bluntly as DuVernay. I don't see myself casting a white dude as the lead in my movie. Not that I don't like white dudes, but I've seen that movie before. Now let me just stop right here and say Jordan Peele is absolutely correct. He has seen that movie before. And you know what? One of the things that I loved about Get Out is you have a young black male protagonist in an interracial relationship, and you're seeing the movie from his perspective. And I found it fascinating. That's what made Get Out great, is because Jordan Peele brought his own point of view as a black man and an understanding of what he'd seen in that movie. And here's the thing. As a white dude, I totally understood what he was doing. And I completely got it. I was like, absolutely. Now, I think that movie, Get Out, could a white person have made that movie? Sure. Would it have been as good? No. I don't think it would have. Because Jordan Peele was able to bring his perspective to that story. He created it, and that's what made it great. That's what made it great. Now, that's what I want more of. And I think when we're talking about authentic stories, what we want are stories that feel truthful. Get Out, I thought, was a great horror film. It was a great social satire. And it was a great story about America. Did it lie? No. Did it make the white protagonists villains? Yes. Because let's face it, in this country, it's not like over the last 400 years that black America has been necessarily taken very good care of by the whites here. That's a fact. It doesn't bother me as a white man to be able to see a man like Jordan Peele make his movie Get Out. I don't feel threatened by it. And as a matter of fact, I walk out of a movie like Get Out with a lot to think about. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's what we need more of. But the thing about Get Out was the story itself that was being told felt correct. That Jordan Peele's agenda was not overshadowed by telling a good story. Sure, was his story, did it get a little didactic at times? Absolutely. But that was by design. And I think the fact that we can get a movie like Get Out made by somebody like Jordan Peele, who got to make it on his own terms, is very important. And we get better movies. Get Out was not only a great horror film, it was also pretty original. I'd never seen anything quite like it, and I'm the better off for seeing it. And so is anybody, so is any genre film fan. But this idea, I want to bring it back to something. Responding to Peele's statement anonymously in the Daily Mail, one executive quipped, if a white director said that about hiring a black actor, their career would be over in a heartbeat. See, I don't necessarily think that's true. I think what Jordan Peele said, I don't see myself casting a white dude as the lead in my movie. Jordan Peele's a black guy. He understands the world from his own perspective. By putting a black Daniel Kaluuya in the lead role, he has more in common. They can bring their mutual experience, even though Daniel Kaluuya is British, but you can bring an authenticity to the character. And I think that's what's really important. And if Jordan Peele casts, first of all, can you imagine the flip side of that, you can't put a white dude in a movie like Get Out and have it be a bunch of black folks that are buying and selling him, because that wouldn't work. That wouldn't work. So I understand why Jordan Peele would say that. I get it. It makes perfect sense to me, and I don't think that Jordan Peele is being racist at all, even though people were calling him that. But it is true what the anonymous executive said. You couldn't say the reverse. Do you know why you couldn't say the reverse? Because black Americans have been persecuted for 400 years. And there has never been true equality in this country. Never, 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 never. So that's why Jordan Peele can say that, and that's why Jordan Peele can make a movie like Get Out, because he's not telling lies. He's telling the truth. And a lot of these marginalized people, they haven't had the voices, whether you're indigenous people, whether you're black Americans, whether you're LGBTQ, or however you identify, you have all been marginalized. And they haven't had voices. So they need to be able to make movies. And they have been, especially as evidenced by the last 13 years of the Academy Awards. That pendulum has been changing. The problem is, are we now going to get better stories because there's more inclusion in Hollywood? You can never trade one oppression for another. And that's kind of what's been happening. Now, here's what's very interesting. So Angela Harvey talked about the Think Tank for Inclusion, TTIE. And I went to their website. And they have one, and I think everybody should go. So you go down. We're a consortium of working TV writers comprised of BIPOC, LGBTQIA plus disabled, women writers spanning lower-level writers to showrunners. TTIE is committed to creating more opportunities for accurate and authentic storytelling, as well as increasing inclusion and improving working conditions for all TV writers, in particular those from underrepresented communities. TTIE is a grantee of the Pop Culture Collaborative and the Roddenberry Foundation, and is the collaborative project of Women in Film. All for this have no problem. I think that's all a great idea. Now I can't find where it was on here. Okay. This is the Right Inclusion fact sheets. These fact sheets are research-driven one-pagers to help guide writers' rooms, writers, and all content creators toward better representation in their stories. This, my friends, is where it starts to get a little insidious to me. As working TV writers, we at TTIE understand the immense power we wield with our narratives. The stories, the characters, and images we depict are more than entertainment. They inform, shape, and influence audiences' actions and worldviews about how we feel about one another and ourselves. If we're to wield this power, we need to recognize that representation matters. It's also good business. So I kind of agree with that, but here's what I find strange. This group is positioning themselves as the people that know best. They're putting themselves in some kind of an authoritative position. And they're stating exactly what they think should be done. I find that problematic. So let's, first of all, Latinx people. Does the Latino community call themselves Latinx? Disabled people. Let's look and see what they've got here. So here's their tips for accurate representation. And they've got two columns. Overrepresented stories or harmful stereotypes is one, and the things we'd like to see more of. Cure at all costs. A character starts with a disability, but is later cured through magic, miracles, or medical intervention. This promotes the harmful medical model of disability, ignoring that disability is a valid identity, one which many people wear with pride. Now, I've known people with disabilities. I know people with disabilities now. I don't know if anyone wears their disabilities with pride. I don't know many people that have disabilities that wouldn't prefer to not be disabled in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's odd that, I think that the idea of, from a storytelling standpoint, if John Locke is shown as being confined to a wheelchair and suddenly he can walk, I think if you're telling a story about the island in Lost and what the island can do, I think there's nothing wrong with telling that story because it comes with a lot of baggage. You understand from a storytelling perspective what that means, especially what it means to John Locke. I don't think anybody is in a wheelchair. I'm not saying we have to discriminate against people in wheelchairs because there are. But this says people with disabilities are a valid identity, one which many people wear with pride. I don't think it's an invalid identity. But in terms of a story that you're going to tell, the overcomer, disabled people overcoming their disability, whether to do extraordinary things or simply to live an ordinary life. As above, this implies that disabled people should want to rid themselves of their disability, and those who don't or can't are somehow failures. Is that true? I don't know. Disabled people should want to rid themselves of their disability. Look, I don't believe that somebody who's disabled should be discriminated against. I don't. But the idea that that people who can't rid themselves, I've known people that, or I have a good friend who was born with a physical disability. I'm sure, we've never had the conversation, but I'm sure, given a choice, he would rather rid himself of his disability. But he isn't for a minute a failure. As a matter of fact, I've never heard him mention it ever, really. And yet, I would never have called him that. And then inspiration porn, portrayals of disabled people as inspirational based solely on their disability, must often for the benefit of a non-disabled audience. These stories often focus on good non-disabled people, but don't address the structural and societal barriers disabled people face. I don't know. I think any story I've ever seen about somebody who's disabled does address the structural and societal barriers disabled people face. That's usually kind of the point of that kind of a story. Sure, do they use those stories as Oscar bait? Yes. Why? Because people who are disabled, that's something every one of us can understand. That's why those stories exist. Overrepresented stories, yes, because it's a shortcut. Just like when you make a story about a cop or a lawyer, there's a shortcut knowing what a lawyer or a cop does. Same with doctors. Same with first responders. That's why there's Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, and Chicago Hope or whatever. These are archetypes that are very easily understood, and they help the storytelling process and simplify it so people get it right away. A burden, disabled characters shown as having a negative impact on their loved ones and society. Characters are sometimes shown dying by suicide to avoid being a burden to non-disabled characters, swaying audiences to believe a disabled life isn't worth living. I think audiences are smarter than that. I don't think that if you see a story about a disabled person who is not in a good place, when I watched Scent of a Woman, I understood that Al Pacino's character, being blinded, would lead to him being full of rage and wanting to kill himself because of how he used to be. Now, do I think that all disabled or all blind people are like that? No. I thought the character of Al Pacino in Martin Brest's film of Scent of a Woman was like that. I didn't think that every single blind person in the world is going to act like him, but that character did in the context of that story. Disability superpowers. Characters with a sensory disability developing superhuman powers related to their other senses, e.g. the blind man with exceptional hearing and the deaf woman with X-ray vision. People who have lost one of their senses typically find themselves, at least from what I understand, find their other senses to be more acute. So I don't think it's a big leap to say, I don't know, if you're Matt Murdock and you're blinded, that suddenly you can develop that kind of perception. Anyway, let's go look at the other side of things we'd like to see more of. The person next door. Characters portrayed in mainstream professions. Bankers, teachers, lawyers, first responders. In families, as good parents, etc. Portrayals of disabilities being unremarkable and normal. Well, first of all, in any story, if you're telling any story, and you're going to have somebody with a disability in that story, and they're being portrayed as unremarkable and normal, well, I mean, does any story show anything as being unremarkable and normal unless it has a plot point, unless the actual unremarkable and normality of it all is going to be then used to propel us into something that isn't? Three-dimensionality. Stories centered on things other than a character's disability, their hobbies, friendships, and career aspirations. Well, aren't they? I mean, if you decide to tell a story about a character with a disability, there's a reason why you're telling a story about a character with a disability. Because if you show a character with a disability and you're going to show them going about their everyday life as being normal, I think what you're doing is you're saying that people with disabilities never have to make any they're just normal people like everybody else. But they're not. They're disabled. And they have to live with that their whole lives. And if you were going to show somebody who is disabled as going about their life in a normal manner, I think you would piss off a lot of disabled people going, yeah, my life's not that easy. I understand what they want. They don't want to other people that are disabled. I get that. I'm all for that. Healthy romantic lives, dating in relationships and having sex. It's a common misconception that disabled people aren't interested in dating and or can't have sex. It is? I mean, I was a kid. My mom took me to see Coming Home. I've never once in my life ever thought that disabled people aren't interested in dating or can't have sex. I've never thought that. I don't know why, according to this think tank for inclusion and equality, that is true. Intersectionality, LGBTQIA plus women, and a wide range of racial and or ethnic backgrounds. Okay, I have no problem with that. That's fine. Pride, characters comfortable with, proud of, and celebrating their disabilities show who a character is because of their disabilities rather than what they can do in spite of it. I understand that it might be great to show characters comfortable with and proud of and celebrating their disabilities, but this is not a kumbaya world that we live in. And again, when I read these kinds of things, I'm like, I think that people who have disabilities and that learn to live with them are incredibly heroic. But I don't know anybody who's disabled who is going to necessarily be proud of and celebrate their disabilities. They celebrate the fact that they've overcome their disabilities, but I don't think anybody would celebrate their disabilities. They think to themselves, I would prefer not to be disabled in this way. I would assume that. Oppression, the exploration of ableism and its impact on disabled people, ADA violations, segregation in schools and institutions, and microaggressions. Well, I think that's a good thing. I mean, I do like that. Better language. Whenever possible, use non-ableist language. Instead of calling someone a psycho or crazy, use words like terrible or irrational. Always avoid offensive words like R-tard and M-jit, a word misused to describe dwarves. Note, dwarf is becoming the preferred term over little person. Okay. More diverse disabilities. Go beyond portrayals of wheelchair users. Show characters as having prostheses, a limp, a stutter, using sign language, experiencing cognitive delays, etc. I have no problem with that. I think it's probably a good thing as well. But again, it depends on what kind of story you're telling. But what is so strange to me is that we have groups who are now telling us in Hollywood not what stories to tell, but how to tell them, and are also saying who should and shouldn't tell stories. This is why more LGBTQ people and more people of color voted for Donald Trump in the election. Because this kind of craziness that I would say comes from my side of the aisle is increasingly problematic when it comes to telling stories at all. That now we have lists of things that we can and can't write. The world is not this way. The world is a very messy, a very gray, a very strange, infinitely strange, and interesting place. And I don't know anybody, I've never met anybody that lives their lives the way that this is described here. Because people don't. This is some world, the universe is indifferent to your suffering. When you go out of your house, the world, the way you want it to be, no, it's not like that. I think this election cycle proves that the United States is a very divided place. And what have I said? You know, whether you like Bill Maher or not, last night he was talking about the fact that the Democrats have really fallen down on the job. And I while I consider myself a classical liberal, I've always voted Democratic. But I have to tell you, there's a reason why the Democrats were not able to flip the Senate definitively. Because we would rather write things like this and tell people how they should be rather than deal with people how they are. And I think the lesson of this election is that there's a lot of Americans out there, whether they're going to call us coastal or Hollywood elites or whatever, that they all feel that they're being underserved. And I think the important thing is we need to start reaching out to everybody, not telling people what kind of stories they should tell, how they should tell them, who they should tell them about. What we need to do is we need to go talk to those people. We need to go find out what their needs are. We need to find out what they think and what they feel. And the only way that we can end the divide in this country is stop pretending that we know everything about everybody else, because we don't. And we as storytellers have to understand that not everybody is the same. Not everybody believes the same things. Not everybody's experience of the world. If you live in a city in, say, like Los Angeles, what do I know about somebody that's living in a rural area in the Midwest or the breadbasket? I don't. But I'll tell you one thing, I'd love to watch an authentic story about those people so I understand more about what they're going through. So then I can get why they think the way they think, what they believe in, why they might vote a certain way. And I think that we can't have people dictating what we can and can't dream, what we can and can't write. All we can do is we can tell our own stories. And I mean everybody. Everybody. You want to get out there? The Academy Awards over the last 13 years prove that there are more people, more BIPOC people, more LGBTQ people than ever before who are working at the very highest levels in the entertainment business and are succeeding. And it's good. And we're going to get more of those stories, and we deserve more of those stories. But I think people should concentrate more on telling their stories than telling other people what stories they can and can't tell. So anyway, that's what I was thinking of today. I think it's important, and just something that was on my mind on this Saturday. Let's see what you guys have to say. Marcus Bisma has written in today. Marcus Bisma. Hello, Marcus. How are you? Dear Rob and fellow imagination connoisseurs, regarding the new 007 play by Lashana Lynch, the reactions from the internet, social media, and other YouTubers have been brutal, but most importantly, misinformed. Where does it say she is the new James Bond? Her character's name is Nomi, and James Bond himself is not an alias name. Where does it say she will carry the franchise as the new 007? We don't even know how big her role in No Time to Die is. The moment I heard the news, I immediately became skeptical. It just doesn't make any sense from a financial point of view. The reality is replacing James Bond with a black female actress is just too much of a risk for the mega-budget Bond franchise. How do we come to this? People just take news headlines on face value and don't even bother to check. This is not even new in the Bond franchise. I remember Halle Berry's character in The Terrible and Die Another Day. There was a plan to do a spin-off movie on her character. In my opinion, it's more or less the same with Lashana Lynch. A plan for a future movie or series for her character. Anyway, I could be wrong, but at least I will wait for the actual movie or the official statement for the whole thing. What a strange world we are currently living in. Well, here's my thoughts. As a longtime James Bond fan, the idea, first of all, Lashana Lynch is smoking hot in her tactical garb, carrying the kinds of weapons she's carrying. And from her clips in the trailers, it looks like she's fucking fantastic in the role. And I'm myself am very eager to see what they do. I think the problem is that so many of all of these characters that we love, that have been around for a long time, are being destroyed because good storytelling is being compromised by an agenda. The agenda of inclusion and all of this is coming before your great characters and your great stories. In our world today, in this day and age, the idea that Lashana Lynch would ascend through British intelligence, through MI6, to the point of being awarded a vacated 00 license to kill makes perfect sense. I love that idea. Bond is retired, and someone took over. I mean, we don't know how many 00s there are. I've never heard of 0012 or 0020 or 020. But the idea that there's a finite amount of 00s that the government has only allowed or sanctioned, okay, you can have 10 00 agents. That's all you get. So at any one time, you're not going to have 11. So if one retires like Bond I would imagine most of them die in the line of duty. The fact that a new agent takes on the 007 moniker or code number, that makes perfect sense to me. I'm like, bring it on. The question is, are they going to suddenly, now that she's in that position, are they going to diminish and are they going to make James Bond himself look like a fool in order to promote this character because Lashana Lynch happens to be a female and is also black? And that's happening a lot in stories these days, which don't seem very true to the very character whose story it is. I don't feel that way. I don't think they're going to do that. But I understand they've been doing it a lot already in a number of other different mediums. And it seems to be, it's happening at the expense of, just like I said, you can't trade one oppression for another. I have no problem with it. What I want to get a really great story. And I think the idea of James Bond coming back into the service after being a family man or whatever's happening in that movie, I don't know yet. I think Lashana Lynch being a 007 or being 007 is very cool. But even the way they've portrayed her in the trailer so far, I mean, I think she looks great. I think she's obviously going to be able to deliver the action. But the way they've portrayed her so far is that she is making fun of Bond. She has no respect for Bond. She thinks he's old and withered up and dried out. Well, as a Bond fan, who wants to see that? I mean, I like the idea that somebody who is younger has replaced Bond, but why do you have to replace Bond and then diminish the character of Bond? And I think that's what's going on. Whatever happened to respecting the service somebody put in? And why wouldn't Lashana Lynch be somebody who actually admires Bond's record? I mean, who knows? But I understand. But I'm reserving judgment until I see the film. I'm excited. I like the idea of Lashana Lynch taking over the 00 moniker. I think that's great, and I want to see how they play it out because it can be done very well, and I hope that it is. The lovely Emma Bannon is here. Emma Bannon writes in. Every time she writes in, I feel like she's trying to butter me up for something. Hi, Rob and fellow imagination connoisseurs. You'll see why very shortly. It happened again, Rob. Why did it happen, Rob? Rob, why? I'm, of course, talking about the latest episode of Star Trek Debacle. Oh, I mean Discovery. Or do I? After the last episode, I had vowed that I was done with Discovery. The show, not the concept. We all need to keep that alive within ourselves. But like that last drink at the end of the night, I went back against my better judgment. I don't know quite what I was expecting. Good writing, compelling characters, a story that made me think, not from Discovery, and on that front, I wasn't surprised. I've always thought that the best episodes of Star Trek were like a catalyst. They gave you a situation or a concept and made you think. They posed questions and maybe gave you possible answers, but left it up to you to come to your own conclusions. You talk about it with other fans and argue what it meant, or what a character did. Sure, it entertained, but it also made you think. With Discovery, it's all so obvious. It's laid out for you. Like someone giving you a completed jigsaw as a gift. Die Trying continues the trend. Right from the start of the episode, Discovery arrives at Federation headquarters. It's all very shiny and high-tech. I'm not saying that it looks like an Apple store, but I kept wondering where the Genius Bar was. Yet with all of this 930 years of scientific breakthroughs, they still haven't found any solutions to the burn, nor to an alternative to dilithium. Did they think of asking the Romulans, and they still can't communicate via subspace? At the HQ, the commander, Admiral Vance, shows all the hallmarks of a good Starfleet officer. Suspicion, rudeness, and that gold standard, a refusal to listen to officers' opinions. There's an excruciatingly annoying hologram that thankfully does get turned off in the meeting with Saru and Burnham, and Vance refuses to discuss the burn in any way, shape, or form, but there's no real expectation other than him being suspicious. What? He can't tell them anything? Now, of course, the writers have done this because they want to save the surprise for later. At least that's my guess. And they think that drama is created by conflict, and to a certain extent it is, but in terms of plot, it makes no sense that he would not inform them of the situation and how they got there. It makes no sense that he would be so brusque. Going back and watching Kirk, Picard, Sisko, Janeway, and Archer deal with similar situations and suspicions, they were always less belligerent. They were far more diplomatic, and they were way more subtle in protecting their security whilst being open enough to try and learn whatever they wanted to from whomever they were communicating with. There's none of that here. There's no nuance, no subtlety. It's all so obvious. Burnham immediately flies off the handle because of course she would. That's worked so well for her in the past, and it's nice to see that her character has progressed after starting a war, going to an alternative dimension, defeating an all-powerful AI, meeting her mother, losing her mother, and traveling 930 years into the future. It's good to see that the writers realize those events. They shape and change a character. Honestly, I saw more character progression in R2-D2, and that's in the sequel trilogy. Then there are what are possibly the most awful interviews with the crew. They're played for laughs. Regardless of what the characters had experienced, it's all a bit of a joke. But it's also awkward, like when someone tells a joke and no one laughs. I haven't seen anything so unfunny since I saw Will Ferrell in Holmes and Watson. Even the doctor, who went through this horrific experience, talks about it in a jokey way, as if it was a rough night in Soho where he'd got really drunk and found himself on the wrong train home. Not that I would know how that felt like. Anyway, moving on. To cut along a story short, they fly off to get some seeds from a seed ship. They should have used a catalog like everyone else, to both help with the medical emergency and to prove to Vance that they should stay together. In the meantime, Georgiou defeats some holograms by blinking. Yep, that's right, blinking. Meets David Cronenberg's. What's the betting that he's from Section 31, has a mysterious conversation with him, and then we don't see her again until the episode's end, because unlike us, she has the sense to disappear until the end when she creates some drama with a response to Burnham asking how she is. So insert drama. Look, the AI is infected, whatever, it doesn't matter. So insert drama with another character on the seed ship who learns to accept his family's death. Add the departure of a minor character that we don't really know that well. Give that character and Burnham a tearful goodbye. Get Saru to give a touching speech to Vance, and surprise, he realizes that the crew should stay together and help them. Of course, the best way to do that would be to download the spore drive details and have Stamets and the others train the crew to use it. But apparently, they decide the thing to do is just to have one ship and crew that are 1,000 years old handle all the important stuff for them. Well, that makes as much sense as anything else in this show. I know this show has its fans, and I truly don't wish to belittle their enjoyment of Discovery. Everyone is entitled to like what they like for whatever reason. For me, the thing is there is so much heritage to Star Trek. It meant so much. Kurtzman's Star Trek neither pays homage to this, nor does it go where no Trek has gone before. It's all been seen before. It's all been done before, whether by Star Trek or other sci-fi shows. Yes, be original. Yes, be spectacular. But if you've got no soul, if you don't understand, not just know, the history of your universe, you're left with something hollow. Previous Star Trek was a banquet. Discovery is chewing gum, and eventually it loses its flavor. Healthy, respectful debate is something we should all be happy to take part in. And it's great that we have a forum to do this, especially in these crazy times. Live long and prosper, Rob, and all fellow imagination connoisseurs. Well, Emma, clearly you and I continue to park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. And hell, if I ever get to England, let's go have a drunken night in Soho together and spend the time talking about Discovery. Or better yet, not. We'll probably have something better to talk about. But thank you for this lovely letter that you wrote. This next letter comes from Mr. Will. Mr. Will. Hi, sir. Thank you so much for your Robservations podcast. I listen to them and enjoy your insights. I'm interested to hear if you had any thoughts on Blake's 7. I saw it as a kid and loved it. For many years, I thought James Woods was playing the character of Avon. I can see that. I ask only as apparently Terry Nation wanted to do an anti-Star Trek, i.e. everyone is corrupt and self-serving, and the Federation is a criminal organization. Either way, thank you, sir, for much of the podcasts. Well, thank you so much for the podcast. Well, Mr. Will, you know what? I love Blake 7, and I got to tell you, until I got the 4 seasons on DVD, I don't have the Blu-rays. They don't exist on Blu-ray because they were finished on tape. But it was funny. I'd only ever seen the same episode of Blake 7. I saw it, I think, 3 times, and it's the episode where it's Servalon's there and Avon is there, and I don't know if Raj Blake is there. Is he there? I don't remember. But the Liberator comes apart. They lose the Liberator. And that was the only Blake 7 I saw until, I don't know, like 20 years ago when they put out in England, they put out Blake 7, the season by season, and I finally got to sit down and watch it. I love Blake 7. I thought it was great. You know, it's a little hard to watch because of the production value, like any 70s or early 80s BBC show where they would go outside and shoot the exteriors with 16 millimeter and then inside everything was shot on videotape so it looks like a soap opera. But I think Blake 7 is one of the great science fiction television shows. Now, it's not really well known in the United States, but it is, like you said, it is the anti-Star Trek, and Terry Nation did a great job doing that. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of Blake 7, and you know, I used to have a little Liberator, but in one of my moves, I lost it. I love the Liberator, and I would love to get a model of it that's like this big. I know like Comet Miniatures has made Liberator models, but I'd love to get something like that that's this big. I think that'd be dope. But yeah, I mean, I'm down. I think everybody should watch Blake 7. You can find it now places. I'm sure it's streaming. Like, actually, let me find out. Let's see. Blake's 7 streaming. Is it streaming anywhere? It's on YouTube. All 4 seasons and 52 episodes. It was as of, it's on, they're all coming to BritBox. Yeah, so I guess they are. Well, let's see. The way back. Episode 1. Daily Motion. Is it here? Yep, it's here. If anybody has never heard of Blake 7 or wants to watch Blake 7, here, I will put it in the live chat right here. And here it is. So if you want to look at something interesting, there you go. Dun, 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 dun. And there's a Liberator. So check it out. This one comes from Electron Star Collapse. Hello, Electron Star Collapse. Greetings, Rob. I think I'm proving to be a glutton for punishment. I thought I was done and called it in a previous letter. I threw up my hands and I walked away from the situation because it was no longer tolerable. It was fuck this shit o'clock. I was done with New Trek, but I guess I'm being pulled back in, kicking and screaming. You are. How could this happen? I talked about Picard with my girlfriend. I discussed how everyone said how awful the series was, and she commented that everyone she knew said it was wonderful. Because I hadn't watched myself, I couldn't rightfully judge the show for faults I did not witness. So to make a fair criticism, I have to watch this unmitigated disaster. I know I'm already off to a bad start, having a negative bias that makes me think that when the Electric Ring of Madness was an allegory about what OG Star Trek fans experience when watching the show, but I'm going to try. I have to at least give it the benefit of an attempt. I'm still done with Lower Decks. It's hard to make me feel personally insulted by watching a show, but somehow CBS figured it out. And I'm not insulted as a transgendered for the unfunny dress joke. I have only had 2 public exhibitions dressed female, and that was Halloween for last year, and the year before dressed as Sailor Mars, which garnered both positive and negative comments, which I took quite humorously. So while I haven't experienced extensive scrutiny, I doubt I'm going to cry myself into the back corner of a Joann's Fabrics to find comfort in a linen embrace simply because someone made fun of me wearing a dress. No, I was insulted that I'm expected like this bigot that kicked her companion until he cried, only to get him to recover confidence with a lesson that broad-stroke racism against aliens is a desirable trait. Unless they replace Mariner with her kinder Mirror Universe self, even though that's not how the Mirror Universe works, I'm not going to watch any more of that. I may have to watch Discovery for a more fair assessment, though the 2-episode pilot and Netflix passing on international distribution of Picard after the fallout of Discovery Season 1 should be reason enough for me to steer clear. Baby steps. If I don't claw my eyes out before the end of Picard, I'll see if I have the mental fortitude to keep going. But who knows? Maybe my disco chills will turn into disco fever. I won't ever know until I give it a few regular episodes. I doubt it because everything I've seen from New Trek so far made Star Trek V feel like a Shakespearean masterpiece. No tears for Kurtzman. See what you did there? Wish me luck and strength. If you'd like my analysis after viewing, I'll try and provide it. Oh, Electron Star Collapse, I think we'd all like your analysis. After all, the point of even bothering to watch is just to make sure I don't blindly accept the consensus. You never should. And good on you for not doing that. If I still hate New Trek, it will be for my own reasons. One question, though. Is there any specific old Trek episodes that I should watch before walking into this? I know Measure of a Man from Next Gen is one, which is one of my favorite episodes, partly since I'm a sucker for courtroom drama. But any other episodes, even if they ruin the enjoyment of watching episodes of Picard, I'm curious what other old Trek episodes would tie in well. Don't let the stars collapse on you. Well, I think you have to watch the 4th season, the 2nd episode of the 4th season, Family, when Picard, you have to watch that, where Picard goes back to his vineyard. There's a number of Voyager episodes, actually, that deal with Icheb and the Borg. 7 of 9, obviously. I don't know if you know this, but 7 of 9 is an integral part of the show. So maybe brush up on a few quintessential 7 of 9 Borg episodes. But that's all that comes to mind. I would be very curious to hear what you think of the show after you watch it. But thanks again for a thoughtful letter. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Omar94 is here. Hello, Omar94. Hi, Rob. One common thing film fans will do is think of a what-if scenario. As in, what if a different director made that movie instead of the director who did make it? Or what if that version of the script was used instead of what we saw on screen? That is something I always think about. In particular, I think about this when it comes to the Star Wars movies. You did the first review of Colin Trevorrow's Episode 9 script, Duel of the Fates, which led me to having a what-if scenario, as I imagine what if Trevorrow directed Episode 9 and used that script instead of J.J. Abrams returning and creating a new script with Chris Terrio. I don't dislike Abrams, but Rise of Skywalker was all over the place. I think if Trevorrow's script was made and he directed it, you'd have a much better movie. I had a similar feeling with Return of the Jedi, but only in the case of the director, Richard Marquand, is the film's director, but I always have a what-if scenario in my head if Steven Spielberg directed it, as he was originally meant to direct it, but the Directors Guild prevented that. I personally don't like Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi is the single most disappointing experience I've ever had in a movie theater. For me. That's not what Omar's saying, but it is for me. It had good individual moments and scenes, I agree, but I didn't like the film overall, I agree. One problem I had was it was too juvenile as opposed to A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, which were much more mature, 100%. I personally think it would have been better if Spielberg directed it, as he would have maintained the maturity of the previous two films, and also because you have Spielberg, George Lucas, and Lawrence Kasdan, the trio behind Raiders of the Lost Ark. If the three of them made something that good, then I think Return of the Jedi could have been a truly epic and incredible film under Spielberg's direction. The prequels are also where I have a what-if scenario for both writing and directing. As much crap as people give George Lucas for these movies, keep in mind he actually didn't want to write and direct them. He only did so because nobody else would. When it came to writing, he approached Lawrence Kasdan and Frank Darabont to write the scripts, but Kasdan turned it down, and I'm not sure what happened with Darabont. In terms of directing, Lucas approached Ron Howard, Robert Zemeckis, and Steven Spielberg, but they all turned it down. I know Willow is a fan of the prequels, as are many people of that age group, but I'm not the biggest fan of these films, even though I am part of that age group. I don't dislike them, as there are many good aspects of the prequels, but I don't think they're that good overall. I think George Lucas is a good idea man, but execution is not his specialty. I think the prequels would have been better if either Kasdan or Darabont wrote the scripts and Howard, Zemeckis, or Spielberg directed them. They all do a better job with the execution. Anyways, those are my what-if scenarios when it comes to the Star Wars movies. I do that for plenty of films, but Star Wars was just the example I wanted to bring up. Thanks, and live long and prosper. Well, Omar, I do that all the time. Yeah, I mean, I just think that George Lucas was a little out of touch with humanity. I think the story that the prequels are telling is interesting. Like I've always said, I think the prequels are good Star Wars, but bad storytelling. I like what goes on in them. I just think the storytelling itself is disjointed and all over the place. And I think George Lucas was so far removed from the human race because, I mean, let's face it, George Lucas probably couldn't go down and get a Slurpee at the 7-Eleven if he wanted for years, so he sort of lost touch with how people act. No one actually is acting like a human being in those movies, and it's difficult to watch them for that reason. But I think you're right. I do think you are correct. Let's see what everybody else has to say in the chat. I don't know what you guys are saying, if anyone is even here. Let's go back and see. Ooh, there's a lot of people here. David Tapia sends in a tip and says, as a movie collector from day one, DVDs were available. Was in one of the test cities. Oh, I was in one of the test cities. Do you guys recall your first DVD and DVD player? Well, David, apparently you've watched Let's Get Physical Media. Thank you for watching. And I'll tell you, my first DVD player was a Pioneer Combi player. It was a Laserdisc. It was a Pioneer. It was the first Pioneer Elite DVD and Laserdisc Combi player, which is pretty funny because my first Laserdisc player was the CLD 900, which was the first CD Laserdisc Combi player that came out in 1985. So that I don't remember the number right off the top of my head. I forget what it was, but that's what my first player was. And my first DVD was actually a reference disc. Like here's look at DVD. But some of the discs I got, it was part of whatever Warner Brothers released first. Like I think things like The Postman and Blade Runner was some of my first DVDs. David Tapia goes on to say, I'm also a huge steelbook collector, and was fortunate to get a Stan Lee to autograph my Iron Man Steelbook at MCU Phase 1 briefcase collector set. Wow, that's cool. Do you guys have any autographed movies in your collection? That's a good question. I have a Laserdisc autographed by, it's Live and Die in L.A. autographed by William Friedkin, and Sam Raimi autographed my Japanese Evil Dead Laserdisc. He wrote on it, Beast Witches, when I saw him during the scoring session for Darkman. But as far as DVDs are concerned, or Blu-rays, I don't know if I have any autographed Blu-rays. I don't think I do, to be honest. Willow is here. Willow asks, so what are you going to do once you've summoned Lucifer? What are you going to ask for from him, or are you just going to interview him? Well, if I've summoned Lucifer, what I would ask him is, first of all, can he turn back the old odometer on my life? Maybe take it back to my teenage years when I'm in high school, and maybe slow down my life. I would ask him for that. I wouldn't ask him for much else, though. I'd want a little bit more life, and maybe to make things easier, could he hook me up with $1 billion in a bank account, which I would use to employ people and make movies. I'd buy a nice house, but of that $1 billion, I'd probably spend, $50 million on myself and my family, hooking everything up. But then I would spend the rest making films and all of that. That's probably, but it would probably come with a great cost. So would I sell my soul? I don't know. I mean, I've always thought that the one thing about hell, everyone talks about, well, it's eternal damnation. But you know what? There would be some comfort in that, because you would know, well, today's over, but tomorrow, eternal damnation, eternal damnation, eternal damnation. I was working on a horror story that dealt with that very issue. The devil was a main character. I don't want to, maybe I'll revisit the story, but I don't want to tip my hand, but it's like that old Twilight Zone. I'm so bored here. Send me to the other place. This is the other place. Well, hell would get boring after a while. So we'll see. I mean, I don't know. I think that's what I would ask him for. I'd also interview the devil too. I think it'd be interesting. He'd be a great interview. I'd like to bring him on Robservations, or maybe I'll pre-record the interview for the 600th show. So, hey, old Scratch, if you're out there, come on board, jump on for the big win. Come be on Robservations. Let me interview you for the 600th episode. Sister Harrow is here. Sister Harrow says, hey, Mr. R&B, small tip as appreciation for your good work. Keep it up. Well, thank you, Sister Harrow. I wonder where you came up with that name. Where does Sister Harrow come from? Emil Johansson says, Rob, I want people to stop asking storytellers to tell them how to live. As the Joker says, there is no punchline. I think a better message to send is for people to think for themselves in an absence of message. Stop sugarcoating Stop sugarcoating reality on screen. Look, I agree. So many people these days, I mean, when I grew up, I never told people what to think. You like somebody has pointed out, this is going around. Star Trek would tell you what to think about, but not what to think. And there is a big difference. And we've seen it. I think I do see light at the end of the tunnel. I think people are fed up, man. I think this election in the United States was a big wake-up call to the far left. I mean, what I used to consider my side of the aisle. No, I think people need to start buckling down and doing their own work, as opposed to getting in everyone's face and telling everybody else what else to do. I mean, it's amazing. People now are so quick to tell everybody else how to lead their lives, and yet they have so many, hey, let's defund the police. But look what's happening in Minneapolis since the George Floyd protests. Violence has skyrocketed, and it's skyrocketed in the black community as well. And because people don't have any, they're bulls in china shops. Let's just break it all. Let's just burn the system down. Great. Then you have the Lord Humongous step into that power vacuum, and suddenly he's the Ayatollah of rock and roll, and you're living in a wasteland where life is cheap. People can take other people to use as they will. That's the danger. And it's a little scary out there. Emil goes on to say, Rob, to have authentic stories seems to mean ignoring quality for the sake of a political agenda. And to some extent, I think that's okay. I get the morality of being inclusive, but this philosophy is what, in my mind, ruined the Watchmen series. Look, I believe in inclusion. I believe that everybody should have a voice. I believe in marginalized people being able to let us hear and experience their stories. I do. But you know what? I want their stories to be as universal as any other kind of story, because whenever you're telling a story on the big screen, by definition, you have to try and put a universality to your story. Sure, the specificity of your culture is what makes your story interesting and delicious. But you also have to have a universal message that everybody, regardless of where they came from, can understand the world over. That's what great storytelling is all about. That even though all the details of where these stories are being told are different, there's a universal message that can be understood by all, that's got to go across all cultures. And, you know, this weird idea of this is what's correct and this is what is incorrect is so weird. And that people are deciding that they're the ones that can tell you as a creator how you should and shouldn't write. It's ideological fascism is what it is. And it's happening across the board. Don't tell me what I'm supposed to think. Tell me what I should start thinking about. Absolutely. Tell me what I should think about. Give me things that I can contemplate. Give me agendas that we can discuss. Tell me something that I should start thinking about. But don't tell me how to think. Don't tell me what conclusions I should draw, unless if I don't think the way you think, then you're going to come after me with your jackbooted ideological thugs. My ancestors lived through that. It didn't end well. Stubble McShaves here. Stallone said on Instagram while driving in his car that he was going to see James Gunn for work related to Suicide Squad 2. And why shouldn't he? They are friends, after all. I would love nothing more than that. Stallone cameo in Suicide Squad 2. Bring it on. Bring it on. Anonymous says, Norman Jewison was supposed to direct 92's Malcolm X, and that was met with a lot of protest. Many people said that he couldn't tell the story the right way. Spike Lee said that only a black person could direct the film. Yeah, your thoughts on this? Well, first of all, Norman Jewison did direct movies like A Soldier's Story. I think that Malcolm X's story does have a universal enough component to it that I think Norman Jewison, I'm a big fan of him as a filmmaker. I think he probably could have made a great Malcolm X film. Certainly his filmography would bear that out. However, I think some of the subtleties, I mean, what I think Spike Lee did is there's a flavor to that film that I think only Spike Lee could have brought to it. Now, Malcolm X obviously was a historical figure, and I think Norman Jewison could have done great with the universality of his story, but might not have brought a lot of the subtlety and the flavor that Spike Lee brought to the film. But that's just me. See, I don't necessarily believe that, I mean, sometimes when you're telling the story, a certain story, when you're telling a story, a larger-than-life story about someone like Malcolm X, the macro story sometimes needs somebody who can step away from the culture and interpret it in a different way, that sees the universality of that story, and that's what they gravitate towards. Whereas Spike Lee, because he's also black, has a kinship to the community. Elijah Muhammad came out of. So it really depends. I mean, I think both men are capable of making that movie, but I also think that Spike Lee in this case was kind of right. I think that it was important that a black filmmaker brings the story of Malcolm X to life. And do I think Malcolm X... Here's another question. Do I think Malcolm X that Spike Lee directed, the movie that we got, would have been better than the version that Norman Jewison would have directed? That's a question I can't answer, and no one will ever know the answer to. But I'll bet you Norman Jewison's version of Malcolm X would have given Spike Lee's a run for its money, based on what Spike made. So, I don't take that as you will. Emil Johansson comes on to say, the rules of how to be PC in storytelling worries for real, because I want to tell stories, but I feel pressured and almost bullied to change everything I want to tell so it fits with these standards. Not sure if I'm the only one. Oh, I know. Everyone's being bullied, and everyone's fearful about how they treat everybody. And I think that that's a problem, that people feel that way. That's that ideological fascism creeping in. It's dangerous, and I think you're right to feel that way. Anthony Gonzalez is here. Hello, Anthony. The way DC animated films seems to absolutely kill it. I personally wish Marvel would greenlight an animated Avengers vs. X-Men 2 or 3-part film and tackle the whole storyline. I would love it. Done right, it could slay. I nominate you, Robert. Can you pitch and direct it, please? Well, I don't know if I could do a good job directing animation. Working on the current project I'm working on, I've gained a great deal of insight into animation, and I guess, I mean, now I've worked on 19 episodes of an animated series. That's pretty good. I mean, I can go say that and be like, oh, I have some insight into that, and I've seen the entire development process. Mark C. Goes on to say, I hate being right. Winning an election has emboldened Hollywood to take it to the next level. It's agenda before story, and the town is already in financial trouble. I'm afraid myself and many others are going to starve the Hollywood system till it collapses. Mark, I think you should have more faith. I think things are certainly changing in and around Hollywood, because the problem is the election proved that Hollywood is more, and the entire Democratic Party is more out of touch than they might have realized. I think the election was a big wake-up call. I think that the problem is, there is no excuse for mobs running rampant in our cities, destroying the livelihoods of small business owners. Why is Portland all boarded up? I mean, my sister lives there. Why is my hometown of Seattle the way it is? These are things that should not have been allowed to happen. And the far left, the idea that America is going to swing over and become some Marxist paradise, we got to nip all that in the bud. And as much as I consider myself left-leaning, I'll tell you one thing: I am no far leftist. I am not about that. I think that American democracy, unfortunately, American democracy, I think, was on a pretty good uphill path. I'm not going to say I did not vote for Trump. I don't think his presidency was very effective. I think the nation is incredibly divided. I think where we're at now, the fact that he abdicated his responsibilities over the last week proves it. I mean, I grew up thinking Donald Trump was a buffoon since the 80s. I mean, I read Art of the Deal. Marla Maples. It was Ivanka Trump. Then it was Marla Maples. He's been a part of the American landscape for the last 35 years. And the idea that anybody would, I don't understand why people thought, I mean, I get why they wanted him to be president, but I look where we're at now. Regardless of what happened, you can't blame anyone but the 4 years of the past administration has left us where we're at. But I think Hollywood's beginning to wake up. This idea, this agenda-driven storytelling, it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Why doesn't agenda-driven storytelling work? Because when you're putting your agenda before your story, you're telling bad stories. Bad stories. You've got to make sure that your characters and your story are more important than your agenda. If your agenda should be look at the old Twilight Zones. Look at classic Star Trek. They did it. They understood. So, Jared Snyder says, "Hi Rob, please tell me how to tell a story about Ray Charles without mentioning he's black and blind. How does that work?" Well, Jared, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I think the idea that You're going to tell a story about Ray Charles just being happy about being blind his whole life? Don't think that's true either. So, yeah, I don't think you can. Alexander Wilson says, Taraji P. Henson said a Hollywood exec told her black women can't star or lead a blockbuster movie. Where's the stories written about that? How many projects did that exec nick or kill because it was going to be about or star a black woman? Alexander, you're absolutely right. But you know what? That's been disproven. And we now live in a world where Black Panther got made. We now live in a world where What's Love Got to Do with It got made. I don't know about the box office on that, but you know, things are different now. But you're right. The common wisdom, all of Hollywood's common wisdom was blown apart because every one of these things that you think is not true. I mean, there is a economic reality that films with a prominently black cast, with the exception of Black Panther, do not necessarily travel well internationally. Because let's face it, there's a lot of fucking racists in the rest of the world. It's not just us. There's still slavery in the rest of the world. America was not the only country that had slavery. There's still slavery going on now. I mean, there's a lot of racist fucks on the planet. There always have been. There probably always will be. But, and Taraji P. Henson, who would say no to her? I'd put her in a movie. I mean, the movie that I'm writing now, I have a very specific black actress in mind to play the lead. There is no one in my mind that I want other than this actress. I don't know if I can get this actress, but when I put it together, it's like I see this movie with this one specific actress in mind. And no one's going to tell me that she shouldn't be in the, you know, you could make, we'd make this movie if you had a white actress in it. I'm like, nope. I'm writing this project for a very specific black actress that and this black actress, I won't even tell you, she's not that young either. And people are going, oh, can't you make her young? You could make her younger. Not gonna. If I get this movie off the ground, I am not going to compromise. I want this specific actress to be in this movie. And she would be the female lead. So, but it's true. And that sucks. And that's bad. And I don't like that. I don't like hearing that. But Alexander Wilson goes on to say, Viola Davis publicly regrets starring in The Help. She said the film was created in the filter and the cesspool of systemic racism. She felt she betrayed herself and her people by being in that movie. Well, I don't want to take away from, if that's what she thinks, then that's what she thinks. And I've never seen The Help, to be honest, so I can't speak to whether or not Viola Davis, in my mind, can do no wrong. I mean, you know that song, Whatever Lola Wants? Well, whatever Viola wants, Viola gets. Whatever Lola wants. I feel the same way about Viola Davis. I love her. I think she's, I mean, I'll watch it. I haven't watched The Help, but I will watch anything that she's in pretty much. I love her to death. And if she said that, I think that's absolutely, that's probably exactly how she felt. And it's, I feel bad. I feel bad when anybody does good work in a project that they feel bad about later. I feel that's terrible. I never like to hear that. Stubble McShave. Hello, Stubble. One of the refreshing things with DS9 was that they never went to the Borg. Well, apart from some indirect references in the pilot. Do you know if there was ever any plans or ideas to include any Borg storylines in Deep Space Nine from any of the writers? You know what? I don't know if there was any Borg storylines per se. I'm sure they talked about it. I'm glad that they didn't, because the Borg, to me, especially what they were doing over in Voyager, there was an over-reliance on the Borg, and they sort of diminished the Borg. I'm glad they didn't do that. So sort of good on them for not doing that, but I don't remember. I don't recall anything. Mark C. says, the missing link for Return of the Jedi isn't Steven Spielberg. It's the exit of Gary Kurtz. 100%. I believe that 100%. He was Star Wars' true North Compass. Oh, I agree. I absolutely agree. And why he left after Jedi, why he left after Empire. But I understand the reason he left after Empire. If you've read Rinsler's books, George Lucas blamed Gary Kurtz for Empire Strikes Back going almost 2 times over budget. And it was Gary Kurtz who actually saved the film, but Lucas was not he was not the active producer of Empire Strikes Back. Gary Kurtz was. And when they went to Norway and ran into bad weather on the glaciers and the money started skyrocketing, Lucas almost lost his 20th Century Fox almost was able to hold Lucas over a barrel. If they couldn't find anyone to finance and make payroll with Empire, it would have collapsed. And I understand that. I get where George was coming from, but you are absolutely right. It's too bad. By the way, if you have not read Rinsler's books on the making of the original trilogy, I strongly suggest you do. Matthew sends in a tip and says, "Oh, hello there. I host a podcast about a TV show, and I'd like to receive screeners for the upcoming season so our podcast crew can have enough time to watch and record our review episodes ahead of time. Who should I contact to request screeners?" Well, I would say that the person you request is whoever does publicity for that show. Most shows have a publicist of some kind, and you can usually find out who that publicist is, maybe on the IMDb, and that's who you would go to. You'd go to the publicity department. So that's what I would do, is go to the show's publicist. Justin Smith became a member of the channel. Well, thank you, Justin. So did Dave Myers. Thanks, guys. And Paul Spence became a member. And Mr. Tickletrunk became a member. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for doing it. I very much appreciate that. As you know, if you want to become a member of this channel, it's only 99 cents a month. You can always support at higher levels if you want. And those higher levels are going to help us print the book that we're going to make and all that. But yeah. Alexander Wilson goes on to say, "It's so interesting that a lot of black people didn't say The Watchmen has a political agenda or was being inclusive. I thought the show was a great representation of America. I never forget people saying the Tulsa scene was racist against white people." Okay, first of all, I don't understand. I've never understood that idea. Here's the thing. If you're a black American, if you're black in the United States, and I'm not black, but I think I can say this for the most part, you know what racism is. You've experienced racism of some kind, because there's a lot of I'm Jewish, and even though I don't quote-unquote look Jewish, I've heard the most incredibly anti-Semitic shit in my life. I know this for a fact. People hate Jews. Does everybody hate Jews? No. But there are a lot of people that do. I know because I've heard it. I've heard it firsthand. I've heard it firsthand since I was a little kid, and I know what irrational hatred of people have been taught to hate Jews, and I've experienced it my whole life, and I can only imagine that black Americans, for me, I'm able to walk away because I don't look Jewish. But I can't imagine being black 100% of the time and dealing with the kind of racism, the casual, daily racism people have to experience if they're black. In America, so here's why when people always say, well, they're racist against white people. You know why? Because they're dealing with the fact that they come from a society where for 400 plus years, black people in America have been discriminated against and, let's face it, straight up fucking murdered for 400 years. And so the idea that anybody says, well, you're racist against white people. Well, yeah, there's a reason for that. 400 years plus of racism of all kinds. I mean, so I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with if our black brothers and sisters hate people because they're white. Hey, man, white people did a good job earning that hatred and that animosity. I don't think it's helpful. I think we all have to figure out a way to move forward and get past all of that. But there's a reason why, it happens and that it continues to happen, because black Americans have never had true equality. Ever. Now, everybody we all want inclusion, but the only way to achieve this is to just allow it to happen. And will it happen quickly? Probably not. But it is happening. It is moving forward, and things are getting better. And are they as good as we want them now? No, because everybody wants 100% equality. It's very funny. I've never experienced any kind of now I'm getting discriminated against because I'm old and I'm white. I mean, there are people that I used to work with that want to work in the same business that I've worked in for a long time. No one ever asked me a question, but now those same people are being like, "Oh, he's an old white guy," and it's interesting that's something that it's not untrue, but it's not something that anybody used to say to me. I mean, so I think that people need to the idea that by depicting what happened to Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as somehow racist against white people, they straight up murdered hundreds of successful Black Americans. Straight up killed them. Went into their homes, their places of business. They killed people and burned that place to the ground. Racist against white people. White people did it. You can't, I mean, it's unbelievable. They just didn't know. White people were horrible to Black Americans for 400 fucking years. And, no amount of reparations, nothing is ever going to change that. Alexander goes on to say, Danny Glover tried for years to make a movie about, I can't, it's another French word, Toussaint Louverture and the Haitian Revolution. He said nobody would finance the movie because it didn't have a white sympathetic character. That's what blacks had to work with for years. Yeah, and they had to. They still do. But I think nowadays you could do that. I think there are black filmmakers. Like if Ryan Coogler wanted to tell that story, he could. By the way, he'd probably knock that shit out of the park because he has a track record. See, the thing about Hollywood, you know what trumps race? Money. If you're a black filmmaker that makes $1 billion with your movies, nobody cares you're black. What do you want to do, kid? People go make me $1 billion. I don't care what color you are. And really, like John Campea always says, winning forgives a lot of sins. And if you're Shonda Rhimes, nobody cares she's black. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of clandestine racists that probably do. But as far as Hollywood's concerned, I want to be in the Shonda Rhimes business too. Who doesn't? Nobody cares she's black. Oprah Winfrey. Do people care she's black? No. They want to be in business with Oprah. I mean, who wouldn't want to be? I've loved Oprah Winfrey since Color Purple, by the way. I think Oprah Winfrey can do no wrong. I love Oprah. I know she probably can, but I do love her. Mark C. says, Rob, I just spent 4 years being called every name in the book, including white supremacist. You'd think there were 73 million people in Charlottesville. No, sir, Hollywood can burn. Well, I mean, what does that mean? You think everybody in Hollywood can burn? There's a lot of different kinds of people in Hollywood here. There's a lot of, you must like something that Hollywood's been putting out. Look at like, don't you like The Boys? There's as many different kinds of people in Hollywood as there are anywhere else. But the problem is, what you're talking about is the fact that Hollywood is doing a certain kind of business, and everybody thinks like, all I can tell you is that there's people from all walks of life that work in Hollywood. To pillory them all under that label and say that, by the way, there was a movie called Burn, Hollywood Burn, but directed by Alan Smithy. But I think that, there's a lot of, I've worked in Hollywood for a long time, and I've met a lot of great people from all walks of life. It's so funny to me because talk about a haven for, say, LGBTQ people, Hollywood is that. And I've met so many diverse kinds of people working on movie sets and doing all kinds of things. But I can understand how you feel that way. Look, I don't think it's Hollywood. I think it's much bigger than that. I think that the left has a real problem, even the people that aren't extreme. And I think this election proved that. As somebody put it, if we don't fucking learn the lessons of this year, we'll have our asses handed to us in 2024. But I don't even think of myself like I think of myself as a classical liberal. That's how I define myself. I don't define myself as a Democrat. I define myself as a classical liberal. So, yes. I think let's see, ladies and gentlemen. Alexander Wilson goes on to say, Wells Fargo CEO said that the bank had trouble reaching diversity goals because there was not enough qualified minority talent out there. That's what today's racism looks like. He also said there's a very limited pool of black talent to recruit from. Yeah, but you know what? I mean, I would say that he's probably that's more of a pragmatic thing than a racist thing necessarily, because it's also like, okay, if you look at how the percentages of race break down in this country. So say let's round it up to 15%. So America is 15% black. Of those 15%, how many of those people are going to go into certain professions that want to go into banking, that have Ivy League educated business degrees, and how many people, first of all, go into the Ivy Leagues? I mean, look at any percentage of any population. In Hollywood, everybody wants to hire at the studio level. When I was at the studio 30 years ago, everybody wanted to hire Ivy League educated people. So if you take the percentage of people that go into Ivy League education, how many of those people come out wanting to go work in Hollywood? So if you look at the percentage of these things, it's small. Most people aren't going after those certain things. Now, does that mean all people are like that? No, but when you say, I know you've told this story before, like the Wells Fargo CEO said the bank had trouble reaching diversity goals. I mean, first of all, does everybody want to go work at a bank? I mean, depending on what it is you want to do, especially if there's a certain percentage. I mean, if you only are 15% of the population, and then you have to have a certain education to get to a certain place, it's not so much about race, it's more about culture. Like, what is it you want to do? Hollywood's the same way. It's not like there's tons of people clamoring outside doors to get jobs. I mean, there are, but the great thing about Hollywood is you can succeed on your own. You can go make a movie, put it up on YouTube. You can go carve your own path. And the places, Hollywood is not that big. There's not that many jobs here. So a lot of people that have delusions of working in the entertainment business, I mean, I think a lot of people, I know more people who've turned to YouTube and they're doing other kinds of things. They're creating entertainment that they are not in any way, shape, or form part of the Hollywood system necessarily. They might want to be, but they don't have to be. They're forging their own paths. But yeah. I think he's probably right. There's not enough qualified minority talent out there because they're probably looking for, again, Ivy League educated business degreed people. And what's the percentage of that? And of the people that get Ivy League, black Americans that go to Ivy League schools and get business degrees like that, how many people want to go work at a bank? I mean, it's all sort of, it's different. Like, what is your career path? I think part of it is that people know they can do other things. They can go out. I think there's probably a lot more entrepreneurial young black Americans now than there have ever been, just like that's true of everybody else, because, you have an avenue. Like I think one of the great success stories is, at least on YouTube, is the two brothers that have their YouTube channel, Twins, The New Trend. I started watching them. I came across them early on, and they had a YouTube channel where they were doing reaction videos. And then after they did their reaction videos, the great thing about their channel is, I think, one, they seem pretty genuine. The two, they love music. But three, they cast a very wide net as far as the music they would listen to. And when they did their and they had, 20,000 subscribers or whatever. And then once they did their review of Phil Collins' In the Air Tonight, the great thing about their channel and the great thing about watching those two kids is, well, the brothers, I guess they're not kids now, but their reactions are so genuine. I think anybody, it doesn't matter what race you are, if you watch these kids, go watch their video when they respond to Dolly Parton's Jolene. But when they did In the Air Tonight, their reaction to it was so genuine, and so it was so heartwarming and just so life-affirming that suddenly they had their channels, they have like 500,000 subscribers now. They're a huge success story, which means they put a video up and it's monetized. Those guys are getting paid, and they forged their own way. Nobody set up a YouTube channel for them. They did it themselves. And I think that's true of the world now. I think people might not just want to go to work for a bank, but I could be wrong about that too. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, kind souls, this has been a longer episode than I thought it was going to be. Tonight, Elizabeth and I are going to be back, and we're going to be watching James Bond. We go into the Pierce Brosnan era with 1995's GoldenEye. So there you go. Yeah. So join us tonight. I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank Mike Bodden. I want to thank Greg Smith. I want to thank the Richard for throwing great Zoom parties and watch parties over at the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page and the Whining About Movies Facebook page. I want to thank my other moderators. I want to thank Mr. Derringer, Joshua Levesque. Let's see who else is here. MC Blackcap is here. Hello, MC Blackcap. I think that's everyone. I want to thank you guys for being you. I want to thank everybody who's become a member of the channel. That's going to help us grow and all that. And I want to remind everybody to go take a look at our new show that I'm doing with Dieter Bastian. We once a week we're going to drop them on Tuesdays because that's what when New Physical Media Day is here in the States. And we already have done our second show, and I'm going to drop that on Tuesday. So please go there and give a like, subscribe, tell me what you think. I thought it was pretty fun. I hope people like it, and we'll do that. We'll be doing those once a week. Maybe one day we'll do a live one so we can chat with all of you. But so that's very cool. And yeah. So remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to everyone, have a better day, and I will see you tomorrow. Go Seahawks.